We're going to move on to item 6. We have Transportation Demand Management Program and the handbook. I'm going to let staff go present.
Yeah, great. Good afternoon, Chair Gokin and commissioners. It's my pleasure to be presenting on this item for the Transportation Demand Management, otherwise known as the TDM program. First off, can you see the screen okay? And hopefully hear me okay. I've been having some internet instability issues, so hopefully I don't drop the call. If I do, I will get back on and probably on a mobile device, and someone else will administer the presentation. So first, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, great. So it's my pleasure again to be presenting the item. I also have with me here Ulla Hester with Urban Trans, and she and they are the consultants who helped the city develop, and they are currently administering the TDM program with the city. So Ms. Hester will participate in the presentation, and she's also available to answer any questions following our presentation. So the agenda for this presentation includes recommended actions. What is TDM and why do we have it? What are the trends? I think it's helpful to look at what are the current trends, especially in consideration to the pandemic, which we are going through. And then our approach to updating our program, the overview of the TDM program, and then of course the most important part is to receive comments on the program update. And I really want to just start off by thanking Commissioner Linke for launching his comments so timely. Like even like as soon as we posted our agenda packet, he launched his initial comments on it. And so it shows he's very informed and very interested in the subject, and we really appreciate the comments because that's the main purpose of this item. Right. So the recommended action in front of you is to receive this presentation and to provide input on the future updates to the program and the TDM handbook. And so starting off, what is TDM? And here's a definition per our city's municipal code, but it means strategies, policies, and programs that reduce demand on roadway infrastructure by reducing single occupancy vehicle trips. So before we get into the plan itself, I wanted to spend a bit of time providing some context in regards to planning development over the last 50 years and the trends moving forward. All of the different programs we have going on, it can get very complicated. So hopefully you see in front of you the timeline for context. And I wanted to show you that between 1965 and essentially when 2008, when the state adopted the Complete Streets Act, the city or the country used the level of service grading standard, with A being the best type of rating for level of service, mainly vehicular level of service, and F being the worst. And that system essentially stayed in place for those 43 years until, like I said, the state adopted the Complete Streets Act. But since that time, there's been quite a bit of movement on the state side and city side to further implement complete streets concepts, along with TDM concepts to help, I would say, implement infrastructure to help move people and not necessarily focus on moving vehicles. So you can see that the state adopted the Complete Streets Act in 2008, and 5 years later, the state adopted Assembly Bill 743, and that Assembly Bill adopted new methodologies under the California Environmental Quality Act, which were needed for evaluating transportation impacts that are better able to promote the state's goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and traffic-related air pollution, promoting the development of a multimodal transportation system, and providing clean, efficient access to destinations. And then that Assembly Bill stated that starting on July of 2020, agencies analyzing traffic impacts on new projects must look to a new metric known as vehicles miles traveled instead of LOS. And vehicle miles traveled is how actual auto travel and proposed projects would create or would be created on California roads. If the project adds extensive car travel on our roads, then the project may cause significant transportation impacts. And so again, then lastly, the city adopted the TDM program in 2019, and then in 2020, the city adopted vehicles miles traveled. So again, I wanted to just provide an overall context to how our programs are developing and how they're interrelated. And Carlsbad has one of the most progressive TDM programs in the county of San Diego. And it's as stated in the TDM plan, this program is a living document and subject to periodic revisions, which is of course the purpose of this report and to your comments that you have received to date and you're going to receive or going to submit. And along with this discussion, I wanted to highlight just like, well, what does it really look like? Like, what does a street look like if you're developing it using the vehicle levels of service standards? And so here's an example of Chapman Avenue in the city of Orange, and it's an 8-lane primary arterial, 4 lanes in each direction, no bike lanes, and pretty minimal sidewalks on the side. So the street's not really a comforting feeling for other modes besides vehicles. And I believe it's this type of street and experience that caused cities in the state to push towards more of a complete street methodology and concepts. So this previous LOS methodology addressed congestion by widening streets. It resulted in wide, fast, and autocentric streets and led to the phrase, "We cannot build our way out of congestion." Excuse me, it was Senate bill and not Assembly bill, so I wanted to make that correction, excuse me. So here is a concept graphic that really highlights, I think, the intent of TDM. And you can see in the graphic, the people that are being moved are signified by the green graphics of people on the sides. And then you have the different alternative modes of travel or mobility. So you can see that, 50 people and 50 cars, that's a lot of vehicles and a lot of inefficiency. If you then move towards the right, you have the equivalent with 20 car pools or 10 van pools or 1 bus. So of course, moving 50 people in 1 bus is much more efficient. I would like to think there's actually a couple of other columns that you could add, which would show 50 people on bicycles, or just with no graphics, just 50 people walking down the street. So that's really efficient as well. So why do we have TDM? I wanted to emphasize it's not a magic bullet to solve congestion, but it is a focus on improving efficiency of mobility of our streets in a healthy and sustainable manner. So then, as I mentioned, I think it's healthy or good for us to look at what are the trends going forward, and especially in light of the COVID pandemic. So this graphic was taken from a recent Sandag study, and it shows that the peak period travel and the highway travel times were significantly reduced. And in addition to that, oh, excuse me, I got a hair trigger for a presentation. In addition to that, the transit ridership just really dramatically reduced. This graphic shows 59% from 2019, but in addition to that, I had heard from Sandag and NCTD that the coaster ridership dropped 90% at its peak during the pandemic. It has since come back from that to about 40%, but it's still dramatically down. So that's a trend. And then I think the good news story is that bike activity had dramatically increased. This graphic shows 37%. So that's a great thing for our TDM efforts. In addition, the other thing which we realize, and we're kind of participating here, but it's telecommuting, or working over these Zoom calls and our internet. So here's a graphic again presented by Sandag, and it shows the percentage of San Diego County businesses that offered or was expecting to offer employees to the ability to work remotely. So you see the pre-pandemic level is 27%, which is actually higher than I thought it would be. But then during the pandemic, it went up to almost 50%. And then they're estimating post-pandemic to be around 40%. So that's quite a dramatic increase from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic behavior. So that's enlightening, and that's going in the right direction, I think, to help with our TDM efforts. And on this slide, I think it really speaks to itself. Here it shows the dramatic popularity of electric bike use in the United States. So this is from the World Economic Forum. It showed a 45% increase in electric bikes sold within the last year. This is a slide supporting that trend, and this is from our own Chair Monogokin, showing the tremendous success of students riding to their schools. And this is Sage Creek High School. And so again, this is very encouraging to help with our TDM efforts. Just another slide showing more bicycle activity. So that's again heading in the right direction. So I just wanted to highlight our approach again for updating our TDM plan and associated documents, and that's to receive the comments from the commissioners and public comment. We did also receive other very valuable written comments, which we forwarded to the commission. So we do welcome those comments. Once we then complete our red line draft of our program documents, we plan on returning to the commission in early 2022 with our proposed revisions for your further consideration. So then moving on into the TDM plan itself, and this is the 4 elements that were included in the plan that was adopted by council. There's infrastructure, regulations and policy, guiding resources, and then TDM program. So infrastructure, we're going to be implementing the infrastructure portion of that with our guidelines, which are contained within our sustainable mobility plan, which you were active in reviewing and recommending to City Council to adopt. So of course, in that we have safe routes to school, which is a high priority. Some other, I believe, low-hanging fruit or high benefits associated with the costs would be to improve the east-west corridors so that the public can safely get with all modes of travel from the eastern areas to the coastline, which is a very high destination point, or people want to get and enjoy our coastline. And then of course, we want to maximize access along our coastline as well. In addition to this, the sustainable mobility plan, we're currently updating the city standards, and that will get them more in line with our mobility element and our recently improved guidelines as a part of SMP. So again, highlighting some of the infrastructure effort. Here is the picture on the left is showing some recent striping improvements. This is southbound on El Camino Real at College Boulevard. And then the picture on the right is something I'm seeing very frequently now. And this is, again, really encouraging. And this is families riding in a train of 1 or more e-bikes. And I see them all the time going from the coast to inland and the inland to coast. So this is on Leucadia Boulevard heading out to Rancho Santa Fe and likely the District 4 area of Carlsbad. So again, we're planning to really study the cost-effective improvements we can make in the next few years and implement more bike lanes for our street networks as soon as we can. I included this slide to highlight a great example, I feel, of a complete streets project. And this is La Jolla Boulevard. They called it a road diet, but it was complete road retransformation. I call it a realignment because some people don't like the term diet. You know, a lot of people don't like dieting, so road realignment's the term I use. So anyway, the top picture is from 2007, and the bottom picture is after the road diet in 2018. And I lived in Bird Rock before it was transformed, and it was a pretty sketchy road. You did not want to walk along it. A lot of people said it caused blight for the area, and it was holding down property values and definitely holding down other modes of travel. Like you didn't see people walking their strollers along La Jolla Boulevard at the time. But after the transformation, you could see the highlights. The traffic incidents and crashes dropped by 90%. And it also greatly enhanced safety and pedestrians crossings, and it enhanced the surrounding retail sales by 30%. But I remember when this transformation, after it happened, because I was really focused on the mobility improvements, and I love to comment. There's a lot of news interviews being done, and I love to comment from one of the newscasters interviewing a longtime resident. And this lady professed that she goes, "Oh my gosh, I knew I would love the new sidewalks and the new landscaping, and I thought I would like the roundabouts, but the biggest thing that I really enjoy is now I can hear the birds sing, and I can't believe the improvements that I'm experiencing from the reduced noise pollution." So to me, I always steer people, if they want to see a really good study that was done on what can be achieved, just Google search planning documents associated with the La Jolla Boulevard project in Bird Rock. So then touching on regulations and policy, and I'll just say that I think that our handbook does a really good job of explaining or tying our regulations and policy to our program's goals. And that's in, I think, 1.4, starting on page 5 of the handbook. But basically what I have shown here in this graphic is it all starts with the general plan, which had a huge amount of public input. And we have a very progressive mobility element in that. And then we adopted the municipal code, which then led into the city adopting its TDM plan. And then ultimately we developed the TDM program in the handbook. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Hester, and she can walk us through the TDM handbook.
Thank you very much. I believe that many of you are somewhat familiar with the program and have seen the current version of the handbook. The handbook was written to serve multiple purposes. First, to introduce TDM, and then to discuss two parts of the City of Carlsbad's TDM program. So one is the TDM ordinance, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. And then also the TDM program for businesses, which is often referred to as the voluntary program. The handbook provides developers and businesses with TDM resources, such as case studies, strategy examples, and similar. And as Tom mentioned earlier, it was designed to be a living document, and that was for a couple of reasons. First, the transportation and mobility landscape is quickly changing, and this allows the city to adapt to those changes and to take advantage of new insights, new technologies, and services that are coming along that we probably didn't think about when the handbook was conceived and the program was conceived. Second, it's to be able to reflect lessons learned from implementing the ordinance and the voluntary program, because every city is unique, every situation is unique, and being able to adjust the program based on those lessons learned is invaluable. So this approach really allows the city to respond to the lessons learned, as well as to incorporate feedback during these major updates. Next slide. The handbook has information on the TDM program for businesses, which I just mentioned. However, COVID-19 forced major delays and changes and caused some rethinking on how to best deliver TDM strategies so that they will have the desired impact in this whole new world that we're facing. Tom mentioned earlier how COVID has impacted, how people travel, whether, they're not commuting at all or commuting very differently because they have concerns about riding transit, for example, or carpooling with somebody. We recently launched a website called carlsbadcommuter.com. And among other things, it includes hybrid work resources for employers and employees. And that's really meant to help both employers and employees navigate what it's like to be working partially in the office, partially at home. What are the issues? How can they best navigate that landscape? And the other focus currently is e-bike and bike safety resources, really addressing that increase in biking as well as e-biking that we've seen in the city. The tool also has ride matching as well as some other capabilities, which will be useful in a post-COVID world. They're not currently being promoted for obvious reasons. But most importantly, the program is currently building employer partnerships during a critical time when businesses are designing their post-COVID return to office strategies. So they're trying to figure out what this looks like, and the program is there to help them navigate that. Next slide, please. Now, the bulk of the handbook relates to the TDM ordinance. It really operationalizes the ordinance, which, as you know, applies to non-residential properties. It lays out the TDM plan process. It describes the 3-tier system that was put in place, including thresholds for applicability and requirements for each of the tiers. It describes required and elective strategies. And the main purpose of the required strategies was to enable ongoing communication with the properties and to ensure participation in the overall business TDM program. This is key for a successful TDM program implementation, and in particular will ensure long-term implementation as developers have moved on, and sold buildings, or changes. There are changes at the property that that weren't foreseen at the beginning. The handbook also describes monitoring and reporting requirements. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the strategies, the handbook identifies suitable strategies to satisfy the requirements of a TDM plan. And there are 2 main categories, which are infrastructure strategies and programmatic strategies. An example of an infrastructure strategy would be secure bike parking, for example, or preferential carpool parking spaces. These are typically implemented on site, but there are also some offsite strategies, for example, adding transit shelters or adding benches or other amenities at shelters. Non-infrastructure strategies include a variety of services or marketing strategies that promote the use of sustainable commute modes. These could include offering ride matching, offering a guaranteed ride home to get home in an emergency if somebody had carpooled or taken transit to work, or transportation subsidies. Each of these strategies carries a point value that is based on their expected trip reduction potential. And this can range for some of the strategies because it can depend on how it's implemented, what the location of the property is, and other factors. Allowing applicants to select strategies makes sure that they're context specific. So throughout this process, staff is working with the applicant to ensure that the strategies are suitable to the industry that the property houses, essentially, and the environment, the transit service levels, et cetera, that are present at the site. During pre-occupancy inspection, the infrastructure elements are then confirmed, and programmatic strategies are confirmed during the monitoring reporting process. If the property doesn't reach their goals down the road, there is a TDM plan amendment that is required. Next slide, please. Now, for a quick progress update, 15 plans have been approved or are awaiting pre-occupancy inspection, which is the last step of approval. There are dozens that are currently in progress. 6 properties have completed a baseline survey. This number would have been a bit higher if COVID-19 had not put a wrench into things. A handful of properties are still fully remote, and it doesn't really make sense to do a commute survey until they return to the work site, because we wouldn't get a true baseline of how people are traveling to the work site. And to end on a high note, I just wanted to share that the city of Carlsbad was nominated for a coveted award by the Association for Commuter Transportation this year and won 3rd place. And one of the reasons for the scoring so well is that the ordinance covers tenant improvements and is therefore more comprehensive than most ordinances in North America, which are typically only applicable to new development. With that, I will hand it back to Tom, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And that concludes our presentation, basically. So we're available to answer any questions you have and receive comments. So thank you very much.
Do we have public comments?
Yes, we do. We have 2 for this item. The first one is from Diane Nygaard of North County Advocates. Honorable Chair and Commissioners, we were very disappointed after reading the staff report for this agenda item. Our expectation was that a status report would actually report on results. Understanding results is critical to determining what changes are needed in the program. This report unfortunately does not discuss that. What, if any, impact has this program had on increasing the mode share for alternative transportation? How many businesses are participating? Have they completed baseline surveys? How many have completed follow-up surveys? And do they show any increase in mode share for alternative transportation? What has been the experience with use of the actions from the checklist, and how does that inform decisions about modifying the TDM ordinance/handbook for the next update? We will separately forward to you and staff a discussion prepared by our attorney on the inadequacies of the existing TDM program. We recognize the city's position is that they are in compliance with the conditions of our settlement agreement related to the TDM program. But the concerns raised in that letter are all relevant for your consideration of what needs to be improved if this program is to achieve a meaningful reduction in GHG. Today, as we see the devastating impacts of climate change around our country and the world, taking this issue seriously is imperative. Thank you for providing the important oversight and direction to staff. And the letter that she mentioned has been distributed to the commissioners. The second email is from Mike Bullock. He's the transportation chair at the Sierra Club San Diego. His email was quite lengthy and had multiple attachments, which I believe was also distributed to the commissioners. So I'm just going to read the introduction so that you get the gist of his email. We should all be serious about TDM for 5 reasons. Number 1, cars are by far the category of GHG emission that emits the most GHG, CO2. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, recently reported that humanity has a code red climate emergency. The IPCC says this because humanity is on a path to result in climate destabilization, which is likely to end most life forms on Earth, including our own species. There are 2 climate targets or requirements that must be achieved to avoid climate destabilization, or put another way, must be achieved to stabilize the Earth's climate at a livable level. The second requirement is to achieve net zero emissions by 2045, or if we are lucky, we might be able to slip that out to 2050. B, the first requirement, which is the most important one, because if we fail to achieve the first requirement, achieving the later requirement won't save us, is to emit at a level that is no more than 80% below what we emitted in 1990 by 2030 as part of an overall worldwide plan to get our Earth's atmospheric CO2 to stop going up. Note that atmospheric CO2 is now around 420 ppm, but it should be around 280 ppm. 350 ppm was deemed to be quote unquote dangerous over 10 years ago. And 5, The 2030 requirement can't be achieved by only electrifying our fleet. We must reduce driving. In quotes, I have done the math and verified this to be true. It seems to me that if Carlsbad were serious about TDM, then it would develop and implement a good TDM program for their own employees to show the employers in Carlsbad how it is done. Once the Carlsbad TDM is successful, meaning that it is favored by most Carlsbad employees and it reduces driving as predicted, other companies in Carlsbad could be required to adopt the same TDM. Since we need big reductions by 2030, we must rely on pricing. Complete streets, better transit, and better zoning need to happen ASAP, but their GHG reductions will not happen fast enough or be large enough given the 2030 requirement of emitting at no more than 80% below what was emitted in 1990. We need systems to improve the way drivers pay for the use of roads and transit. The road use change, RUC, is a state function. Carlsbad needs to ask California to implement a good RUC system in time to help achieve the 2030 target, ASAP. Parking policy reform is for the municipalities. And Steve, referring to Commissioner Linke, you are correct. TDM needs to be for all types of development. I am a retired satellite systems engineer. This is a systems engineering problem. I have worked the problem of identifying a set of enforceable measures to ensure that cars will achieve the 2030 target. It has been presented multiple times at Air and Waste Management Association conferences. Each time the paper was presented, it was peer reviewed. The second attachment file is the paper. The third file is the PowerPoint file that I used to present the paper. So that's the first paragraph, which probably approximates the 500 word limit, I'm assuming.
Okay. As Mr. Frank showed my photos, I am very passionate about kids taking e-bikes. This is a new phenomena, and I think we need to keep the momentum going. I feel that is low-hanging fruit. Kids like the freedom and independence, and it gives them self-confidence. We do have a little bit of work because it's a new phenomena and no one really saw it coming before COVID, that around schools, kind of the last few hundred feet between a major intersection to where they can park their bikes, they don't have clear access like we have for the vehicles. So that's something that I'm working with the school district and the city and hopefully the community so we can create that, because my vision is 20, it's a personal goal, 20 to 30% of the students, especially high school, to use walking or biking. And we have to offer, as we offer clear, safe for vehicles drop-offs, we should offer for that. So I'm very passionate about that. With that, let's start with any other comments that Commissioner or questions. Commissioner Linke.
Thank you, Chair. So I submitted a letter, and it's a very complex issue, but I do want to go over some of the things in the letter and maybe ask questions of staff. So I have identified what I think are 4 different regulatory pathways. I'm calling them regulatory pathways. There might be a better term for it. That require or that utilize TDM. And the presentation, I think, focused mostly on the TDM ordinance and TDM handbook, which right now are focused exclusively on reducing employment-related vehicle trips and only on larger new businesses. Second one, which I've talked about a lot in the past, are mobility element policies in our general plan, and specifically policies 3P8 through 3P11. And rather than the focus of the TDM ordinance and handbook is on reducing greenhouse gases for the climate action plan, the general plan TDM references are more about having developers pay their fair share when they're adding traffic to streets that are congested and are failing our GMP standard, to try to reduce traffic congestion, which is a very different reason for TDM. The third area is our multimodal level of service point system, and that's to achieve the minimum GMP standard to improve non-vehicle modes of travel. And I have been on the ad hoc committee for reforming that MMLOS point system because I feel it's too lax. It needs to be far more stringent. The standard is way too low. But I wanted to include definitions of different TDM approaches that would help those non-vehicle travel modes in the point system, but have been told that that's probably better handled in the TDM handbook. So I think it could be done with the MMLOS point system, but if that's not the case, then this is a third regulatory pathway where I think the TDM handbook needs to be revised. And then the fourth one is state mandated environmental reviews, or the CEQA process, which looks to reduce vehicle miles traveled. Now, all these are sort of overlapping, but right now, notwithstanding the award that Carlsbad got for our program, it's more, I think, an award for words on paper, and the implementation and the lack of covering all these regulatory pathways, I think, is a problem. So I guess my first question to staff is, are all four of these regulatory pathways going to be covered? Or my suggestion is that you need to include all four of them in any revision of the TDM handbook.
Yeah, if I may, Chair. So your comments are all great comments, and again, I applaud you for getting them in so early. You'll notice that in our staff report, we actually had we did go into what we would be looking at as we experienced the TDM program over the last couple of years. So we did mention the residential aspect, which you had mentioned as well. So I guess in short, we will be looking at what documents we need to update to best update the program as a whole to best serve our program's goals. So I think we're going to be looking at that.
Okay. And then in my letter, I provided several examples of the TDM plans that have been submitted by developers. And I have submitted public comments for the past 2 years on these plans that have been submitted. I would say that 0% of my suggestions have been implemented by staff, even though I think they have the latitude to do it under the current rules. So one example is the current addressing of residential developments that are adding traffic to streets that have been exempted because they're congested. And so the mobility element policy 3P8 through 3P11 would apply to them. And so my examples were, there were 3 large residential projects that are adding between 1,200 to 2,400 new average daily trips to those streets. But for some reason, staff has applied only a tier 2 plan, which is supposed to be for 221 to 275 ADT. I guess my question is, one, it seems like an arbitrary selection to pick that low level of a plan with projects that are adding thousands, not a few hundred trips to those streets. And 2, is part of the update going to be to revise it so that it better addresses residential developments that are adding traffic to those streets?
Yeah. So again, I'd say it's a good comment, and we will be looking at it. I think that's pretty similarly tied to what page is it? Right, the last page of our staff report we get before we get into the exhibits. I believe that's covered with bullets 1 and 3. So I do, and I do hear your comments. We will be looking at them, and then to just touch upon the examples you gave with past TDM conditioning of projects. I think those are good examples that show what we need to look at. So, I know, and I thank you for putting forward a lot of the effort you do. takes a lot of time, but it does provide value for us to look through how our program can be approved. So I appreciate it.
Okay, and I want to make it clear that I think that the transportation staff who are here tonight and with us every month are doing a good job of reviewing it. And it's really the community development staff that is completely being non-responsive to these suggestions. But I guess a follow-up question is, there is no rule in Carlsbad that all residential projects should use a tier 2 TDM review. Why would we need to wait until a program update occurs to say, you know what, our mobility element says that, and our transportation impact analysis guidelines say that whenever a development, no matter whether it's residential or commercial, is adding traffic to streets that have been exempted due to congestion, every one of those trips added to that street needs to be addressed. And a tier 2 plan under the commercial TDM ordinance and handbook is just not a sufficient response to that. And what I've heard at the planning commission meetings from community development staff is, no, we're not going to have 2 different TDM plans. So no matter how much traffic a residential project adds to a street, they will only apply a tier 2 TDM plan that's supposed to do between 221 and 275 ADT. So is there any reason we can't be implementing a higher standard for those exempt streets right now, rather than waiting till an update is completed?
Before anybody,
Go
Mr.
ahead,
Frank, if I
Rob.
could just start really
ahead.
quick. Commissioner Leakey, I just want to kind of just speak up for those who aren't in the meeting. I want to make sure that we are clear that all departments in the city follow the law, that all departments do things that are appropriate and consistent with our applicable procedures. So I just want to make sure that we're not painting any one department or another in a light that would insinuate that we're not following, like I said, the law or any other kind of accepted standard practice. I just want to make sure too that we're trying to focus on where we come in with traffic and mobility, because I think we're beginning to kind of get off the topic of accepting feedback to work into the TDM updates. So just wanted to weigh in before we moved any further on that.
Okay, so I will say that I think that the relevant feedback here is that we need to change the handbook to reflect this. But I'll retract the question, but I'll leave it out there to say that when our mobility element says that we need, and our transportation impact analysis guidelines say that we need to account for all trips added to exempt streets, and these projects are adding between 1,200 and 2,400 trips to exempt streets, that the application of a plan that's designed for projects that are only adding 200 trips to a street is not appropriate. So I'll retract my question, but leave that. I also want to note that I think it's notable that community development staff is not here tonight to answer these types of questions.
Well,
right,
that was actually on my request, Commissioner, because I wanted the agenda focus to remain on improvements to the program and not revisit community development issues. So I actually requested that they not be here, and I thought it would be more useful for the commission to have our consultant on the call. So that's the reason why.
Understood.
Yeah.
Understood. Thank you. Another notable example is that supports the need to change the rules is that there's a fast food restaurant going in at Palomar Airport Road and Avenida and Encinas. It's going to add 2,200 approximately trips to the surrounding area. 1,300 of those approximately will be going through the GMP deficient exempted Palomar Airport Road, Avenida and Encinas intersection. And they were only required to do a tier 1 plan, which is designed for projects that generate between 110 and 220 ADT. Now that one is that one's still under review and hasn't been finalized yet. And again, no need to respond to this based on the previous comment, but the fact that this is an ongoing issue right now, it should be addressed even before we address the I think, finish changing the handbook. All right, so my specific comments on the handbook are in section 1.7. Who does the TDM program apply to? Based on things I've just said, we need to apply it not only to employers and their employees, but the residents and patrons of those businesses. All the traffic needs to be taken into account based on those 4 regulatory pathways. And there can't be the excuse from the other department that, well, we only have one TDM plan, and we're just going to apply the absolute minimum requirement, the tier 1 or tier 2 plan. In section 2.2, the thresholds of compliance. This is where you've got the employees, the customers, and the residences being added to exempt street facilities. I think the tier system, there needs to be changed to account for all those trips. Section 2.5, the tiers themselves. And I think this was referred to in the staff report, and I appreciate the staff report. It did acknowledge many of the things I've been raising in my public comments on developments, as well as through the commission. But just as an example, I want the rest of the commission to understand that if you do a tier 1 plan currently, which is the one that was applied to that fast food restaurant that's adding 1,300 trips to an exempt street facility. Tier 1 plans.
Commissioner, I'm really sorry. We've got to get back on how Traffic and Mobility Commission, we're veering off into projects. We've got to really get off that. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. So I think though that these examples are examples that I'm creating an example. The examples are serving the purpose of showing that the current tier levels in the TDM handbook are too low to mitigate the traffic produced here. I'm specifically not naming these developments. I did in my letter, but I'm specifically not naming it. I'm not saying that we can do anything about them. This one we probably can. But in this case, a tier 1 plan, basically all it requires is that an employee of the business talk to a city employee once a year, and that they circulate perhaps a pamphlet that says, employees, you could walk or bike to work if you want, or if there's a bus that actually serves here, you can do that. But that's the extent of a tier 1 plan. All the tier 1 plans I've seen have been a pamphlet circulated to employees. That's not going to compensate for all these trips made by the employees or their customers, or if it's a residential project. A tier 2 plan, and there's 3 tiers, the tier 2 plan adds on to that tier 1 plan more marketing materials, plus every tier 2 plan I've seen, which is the vast majority of plans that have been submitted, they always do a bike rack and a bike repair station. So they put up a bike rack, and the bike repair station probably has an air pump and a stand to put the bike on to pump the tires up. And at that point, that satisfies a tier 2 plan. And these are just not, to me, in my opinion, not adequate, even to serve the hundreds of ADTs that they're supposed to, let alone the thousands of ADTs that they're being applied to in the residential projects. Okay, and finally, the tier 3 plan. A few developments have been required to do the highest level tier 3 plan. But adding on to the tier 1 and tier 2, if they put a cover over the bike parking, they put some showers in, and they mark some spaces for a carpool, and they allow certain individuals to have a compressed work schedule, or that takes care of a tier 3 plan. So every business is going to take the absolute lowest denominator, and I wouldn't blame them for it. It's that if they can get by with the least expensive, where it's all upfront costs, they can spend a couple $1,000s to install these things, and then they're done. So the bottom line here is that my suggestion on section 2 with the tiers is that we need to strengthen the amount of measures that are taken. The strategies need to be beefed up in order to properly accommodate the trips being added to the road. All right, and then as far as the monitoring is concerned, because I have a question here. I believe that the surveys should be done every year, at least for the first 2 years, to make sure that they're being monitored properly, rather than biannually, to ensure that they're making progress. But the bigger concern for me is looking to see whether the programs are working, whether the individual measures are working. So I gave some examples in here that have been in TDM plans. In one case, there was a parking management plan that said, okay, we're going to charge for parking, and that's going to reduce vehicle ownership proportionally, and we're going to be reducing vehicle miles traveled. But from what I heard from staff in response to my comments is that they're not going to monitor whether that program is working, i.e. they're not going to see what is the reduction in vehicle ownership or the reduction in the use of parking. They're just going to ask this is a residential development. They're just going to ask the developer or the HOA, do you have that fee program? Are you charging for those spaces? And they'll say, yes, we're charging for the spaces. And then that's the definition of, okay, they're passing. But I believe instead of asking that question, you should be asking how many spaces were rented and are you meeting the original goal that was stated in your environmental plan? So my suggestion there, actually, I have a question. I have a couple more and I'll finish up. So the question is, what is the monitoring going to look like? Is it going to look like what I'm thinking it is, that it's just going to be, are the programs there, or is it going to look at the actual performance of those programs?
Ms. Hester, if you might take the lead with answering that question, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely, and this is a really good comment and concern. Yes, the idea is to find out, how many people are participating in charging for parking is an interesting one. But let's say it's a transit pass program, so would be finding out, how many employees are taking advantage of a subsidized transit pass program, for example, or are enrolled in the carpool program and eligible for preferential carpool parking space, or enrolled in a guaranteed ride home program. So it goes a little bit further than just saying, is the program in place or not.
And I'll add on to that, Commissioner. I think one thing that is challenging with the residential application is the enforcement end of it. Like, we don't have the same options or tools available that we do on the commercial side with residential projects. So we have to get more creative, I guess you could say. So, I hear your comments, but I guess in this case, we are talking about commercial tiers as well, but just sharing with you, the residential side is more challenging.
Yeah, and actually, I should qualify that, like, my response was related to commercial. On the residential side, as Mr. Frank noted, it is more difficult, and yeah.
So if we have a mobility element or a CEQA review that requires a certain percentage improvement for VMT or for multimodal level of service, and we have the ability to do that enforcement with commercial, then I would make the suggestion that we add the enforcement for residential. And is there any reason we couldn't do that?
I don't feel like I can give you a complete answer. We hear your comment, we'll look into it.
Okay, so that would be, it all comes down to, are these plans actually functioning? And are you monitoring whether they're functioning? And then if not, there needs to be a penalty. There needs to be a monetary penalty or something similar, and there needs to be a way to enforce it. If you can't, everyone's just going to ignore it.
Right. And I can say that, we do have our monitoring program that's in our plan and in our handbook. COVID put a pretty big wrench in a lot of the employers' efforts to I guess, complete their monitoring programs. And again, Ms. Hester, you can take the lead of just providing kind of an overview of where we sit with some of those efforts.
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my presentation, like some of the some of the properties that were up for doing their baseline survey were still 100% complete work from home. So we put their monitoring on hold essentially until they're returning back to the office. And once they do, we'll be working with them to complete their baseline surveys and then get them on their 2-year cycles for follow-up surveys.
Okay, and then my final sort of broad comment slash suggestion slash question is I provided several very specific examples, and with the feedback from Mr. Contreras, I will try not to get into the specifics of what projects did these, but in my letter, I provided very specific ways that developers and frankly, community development staff have sort of what I would say creatively reinterpreted various programs, various TDM strategies to assign what I would say, in my opinion, are ridiculous numbers of points or ridiculous levels of.
Commissioner, you're going off track here. We can't paint another department in a negative light. I am here, my office advises all departments. If another department has acted a certain way where you disagree, that's one thing, but I cannot let this conversation veer off into insinuating anything other than the city has followed the law, because that's what our office advises on. So I want to make that clear. Let's please get back onto the mobility side where you provide suggestions or how might you want to see a change?
Can we get, okay, let's stop for a second. Can we get a clarification? What is the role of the Community Development Department in the approving or with the TDM on projects for the public to know? Why are they being brought up into the conversation?
Well, so first of all, I don't advise community development. Another city attorney does, but when projects are filed with the city, their role is to determine whether certain planning related requirements are met in connection with the proposed development. So at a very, very high level, we have a specific department who's in charge of making sure that projects and their impacts are accounted for. So here, our role tonight, this agenda item is just made to provide input or feedback on how we might change TDM policies. So I want to try and get us back onto that track.
And I'll join in. Oh, sorry, Chair, go ahead.
So I understand what our role is here, but if we do make the TDM and we advise and we change it in such a way, however, it's not getting implemented or it's not getting reviewed, or the process and the success of it, then it's pointless of what we're doing here. And my question is, and I'm curious for myself and for the public, is when a project is applying for the application and it comes to mobility aspects, is another department other than traffic and mobility department or transportation mobility department making that decision? And where does the actual experts, traffic and mobility, transportation and mobility, have input?
So I'll answer that or start to answer it, Mr. Contreras, and if you want to join in, you can join in. So our department administers the TDM program, and that's why we're taking the lead in this presentation. But the Community Development Department does do the TDM reviews for the development applications. So as I mentioned, and we saw in the timeline, this is a new paradigm. TDM is a relatively new concept. Started being discussed at SANDAG in 2012. And there's still a lot of cities that don't have active TDM programs. So with that said, it's an evolving program, it's a living document, and we recognize there's a lot of room for improvement. So the examples which Commissioner Lenke provide help us see real life where there's problems and where we can improve the clarity amongst the different documents and where we can improve our TDM handbook. Community development staff will comply with the and do comply with the TDM handbook to the best of their judgment and ability. And where we can improve those guidelines and improve the handbook, that's going to improve, I think, everybody's understanding and expectations on the program, and we'll get definitely less confusion and less ambiguity, and we'll get hopefully all on the same page as far as expectations go, and hopefully we'll see better results as well. So it's still a pretty young program for the city. All good comments.
So am I understanding correctly? I'm sorry to interrupt. Am I understanding correctly that the program, the TDM, is made by traffic and transportation engineers? However, the applications and the plans that are submitted by developers are reviewed by not transportation and traffic engineers?
Yeah, the actually TDM submittal is reviewed by the community development team.
Okay, so I think this is where Commissioner Slinky's comments are relevant, and I totally support his comments and questions and issues he brought up, and I think everyone does in our city, because we do have an issue with development and parking and traffic, and we can create these plans all day long, but if they're not being applied, and I know it's, everyone is trying their best. It's just been a while since this issue has been happening, and hopefully we'll get to a point that it can change. Is it ever going to be possible for traffic and transportation engineers to review those applications? I mean, it's only making logical sense.
Yeah, I guess, again, it's, you know, an evolving program. I think the examples that Commissioner Linky provides are good things for us to look at. I don't know, Ms. Hester, if you have anything else to add as far as responding to the commissioner's comments.
I would just say that obviously we'll be looking at the process along with the content of, you know, the handbook, you know, as we're helping the city work on updates.
Yeah, and then also regarding the handbook, so when the handbook is updated, the community development team will use that as a part of their submittal reviews. And yeah, and so it's gonna, all of these examples are gonna help us better the program.
Okay. Commissioner Lindsay?
So two points to be made based on that discussion. I would say that the TDM program in Carlsbad was proposed way back in 2014. And so we are, you know, with all due respect, we're 7 years into this now. And I understand that a lot of cities haven't done it yet, but Carlsbad made the decision back in 2014 when they drafted the general plan update that they were all in on TDM. And so I think we need to do better. And second comment or question is Urban Trans has a $400,000 contract with the city, and they had several different deliverables. And I understand now that maybe some of them have been delayed, but one of them was to review all the TDM plans. And I'm wondering, has Urban Trans been reviewing all these TDM plans? And again, I don't want to upset Mr. Contreras, but this is relevant that if Urban Trans is reviewing and signing off on these TDM plans as if they were satisfactory, I don't agree that they are, and I have many examples. How has that been working?
Can you clarify your exact question on that? Did you want to report on?
So in August, I look back at, I've done some deep research on this. Back in August of 2019, the city signed a contract for $400,000 for a 2-year contract with Urban Trans, and there were, and so that just expired. That 4 year, sorry, the 2 year just expired like a week ago. I don't know how much of the $400,000 has been spent, but if you look at the contract, it contains a whole bunch of deliverables, including establishing a stakeholder advisory committee on TDM, but I haven't seen any involvement by our commission as a stakeholder in such a committee. A data visualization showing employee and residential clusters and travel patterns and transportation networks, inclusion of safe routes to school pilot program and TDM reporting in year 1, establishing a TDM fee to cover the city's administrative expenses for TDM, creating a dashboard to track the TDM plan development and compliance monitoring. And finally, the thing I just mentioned, reviewing TDM plans by developers to make sure that they're robust enough to meet requirements. So, I mean, I know there is a representative from Urban Trans here, and I'm curious which of these deliverables has been done, and have they been reviewing the TDM plans that have been going through?
Excuse me, if I may chime in, Commissioner Linke, I think we need to focus back in on comments from the commissioners and the public on how to improve things in moving forward. I don't believe that it was agendized, and Mr. Contreras, please correct me with regards to the contract with Urban Trans or performance to date. So I think we should move forward on focusing on all of the constructive comments on how to improve our TDM handbook and TDM plan. And we will take all of those comments and discuss them and incorporate them into the future.
Okay, so I just want to end by saying that, thank you, Ms. Gomez. I just want to end by saying that there are several examples in the letter I wrote where developers have claimed, you should get 1 point for a transit shelter, but they said, okay, but it's an innovative feature, and there's a line in the TDM handbook that says, if there's an innovative feature that you can add, you can declare up to from between 1 and 5 points for this innovative feature. And so this developer claimed 1 point for the transit shelter, which is in there too. But then they said, well, it's very innovative because we could also use it for car share rather than just transit. And we're going to take 5 more points in our TDM plan, the maximum 5 points. So they get 6 points then for that one transit shelter. My concern is that we need to bolster the definitions of how you get these points, and or be careful here. Staff needs to be very careful about how they allow those points to get assigned. The developer can propose that, but the staff's interpretation of that, or it's the more clear definitions that need to go into a TDM handbook that aren't allowing these programs to go outside of the definition of what they really are going to achieve. So I'm sorry, this is a very important topic to me, and I don't want to have veered off, but I think we have major problems that need to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Linke, and I do support your comments and questions and suggestions. Okay, we're going to go next to Commissioner, our new Commissioner, Coelho. He's got some questions for staff.
Yeah, hey, Commissioner Linke, first I want to say that was a fantastic presentation, and I applaud your effort on how well researched and thorough it was. It made it easy for me to, I think, get caught up on TDM. I, read through most of the handbook of 100 pages, but that was pretty good. There's some key points in there that made it easy for me. My question, I have a couple questions. The first is, how do we address it, whether it's this forum or different forums, where there's an intersection between traffic mobility and planning? Like you mentioned before, there's clearly an overlap in some of these things. So how is that dealt with? Who's responsibility for that? How does that manifest itself in review, whether it be for us, the City Council, other commissions, et cetera?
Thank you, Commissioner. So just for clarification, are you saying planning review or community development review of TDM, or are you talking about just our interface on community development submittals like development applications?
Yeah, so for specific projects. So a specific project, as it's going through the planning process, is going to go under review for multiple commissions and multiple departments, right? So some of this overlaps, and I think that's where we're running into a little bit of, you know, gray water here. Is some of this stuff is handled in planning community development long before it gets to us. So how do we, I think to Commissioner Lincoln's point, how do we fix that, or how do we address that? How do we discuss that before we're at the, you know, the point where we're kind of phoning it in on trying to address the issue, if that makes sense.
Right. I see Ms. Gomez has joined the line, so I'll let her lead the discussion. And thank you, Ms. Gomez.
Sure, and I think your question, Commissioner Coelho, is with regards to who has the lead on certain, with regards to the commission. So there are certain levels of authority in which the private development projects actually do go to the Planning Commission for their approval. There are some authorities that the city planner has that are within his purview. And then there are some things that go on up to the city council. So for different types of projects, it goes through different levels for approval through the processes. The Traffic and Mobility Commission does not approve the TDM plans, et cetera. It is not within the purview of the Traffic and Mobility Commission to review the TDM plans for these private development projects. However, it is within the purview of this commission to take a look and provide some input on how we can improve some of our processes and things that are related to traffic and mobility. So that's the reason why we're trying to focus. You might have noticed that Mr. Contreras was trying to focus not necessarily on community development, not necessarily on the projects that have been approved and authorized by City Council. Some have been appealed and have been determined and decided upon by City Council and the Planning Commission or the City Planner, but really trying to focus on how we can improve the TDM handbook, the plan, et cetera, and setting the framework for us to improve things in the future. So that's the difference. So it's not an overlap of responsibilities with the Traffic and Mobility Commission, because the Planning Commission is not doing what we are trying to do in today's session. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I appreciate that explanation. And so as far as the TDM handbook itself, who approves changes to that? How does that process specifically work?
So that is explained in the TDM handbook and the ordinance, and that the revisions can be made by the city engineer, which is myself. But as the council and this Traffic and Mobility Commission have explained, we like to work in a transparent manner and to bring forward updates such as this to your commission for plenty of public vetting and for commissioner input. So again, that's why our approach is to present the item to you, to ask for your comments, which we've received a lot of valuable comments, and then to go back and for us to make a redlined suggested redline revisions to all of our documents. To Commissioner Linke's point, it may not be just the handbook we're looking at. I see we could improve our clarity on our program by maybe revisions to some other documents. But so hopefully that answers who has the authority to make revisions to the handbook. And then just to touch upon reviewing applications. We do have clear responsibilities on who reviews what for each development submittal. And so while our department oversees the TDM program, and we actually do review TDM for CIP projects and public facilities, we don't for the private development. So that is currently being reviewed by community development. We do provide traffic impact analysis reviews now for all of the community development project submittals. So hopefully that helps.
So can you give me some examples of some of the changes that have maybe come out of the commission in the past to the handbook? To not cross the line they were talking
Sure,
about before, like are we talking about? Yeah.
So I think this is the first time we're coming to the commission on the subject. I've been with the city coming up on 2 years or a year and a half. But from what I've heard, I don't think we've been to the commission before on this topic. It was, as I mentioned, it was adopted back in, I think it was August of 2000, either July or August of 2019. So I see Ms. Gomez.
So then for like some of the, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I see Ms. Gomez joined us and she might have more on the history of the program and if we've come back with any other updates.
No, this is correct. It is the first time that we are reviewing it for updates.
So the type of changes that we're looking for to not like, veer off into another department's territory, is that more along the lines of adding ways to get points, coming up with a new criteria in which a developer could gain points per TDM, or looking to tweak the definition of earning points for, as Commissioner Linke pointed out before, the bus, that covered bus stop or whatnot?
No, those were all good. Those were all good suggestions. That's exactly what we want. So, as I mentioned, Commissioner Linke's examples on his past frustrations in reviewing community development applications and the way that they were conditioned are, I'll acknowledge, it could be frustrating because he wants us to do more with this program, but we have to work within the constraints of our legal authority and the nexus we can do and what is actually approved by our council in our current program. So we want to take the program to the next step, and that's why although there's frustration clearly there, the examples he provided in his written correspondence will help us update our documents.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys answering those questions. I know I'm a little new, so I'm just trying to get my bearings. And I know you guys have a thankless job that people just want to yell at you all the time, but I appreciate your help.
Well, on that note, ask any question you have. This is honestly, I've been in the industry for 30 years, and it is a complicated issue when you start looking at all the different programs that we have in place and how they interrelate, and where our legal authority is and the nexus between what we can do and what we can't do. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask the questions. That's how you become more informed, and then you're a better commissioner. So yeah, and even off this call, I encourage any of you, if you have questions on things, just please call staff.
Yeah, that's why I have to pipe up, because of the Brown Act. I just have to keep us more or less, we really have to stay within the agendized topics. So these questions, if we're off topic, they just got to go offline. So that's why I'm piping up on as much as I am this evening.
So one thing is a comment is that traffic is the one part that affects every resident in our city. This is the biggest issue that everyone complains about. This is the biggest, it affects from the baby that's going to the park to the senior that's going to the doctor appointment. Every person is being affected by traffic, and it is a new thing. So maybe it's time for the city to change some processes that actually Traffic and Mobility Commission or department actually reviews those developments that actually create more traffic in the city, because it's easy, well, actually it's not fair to the department and to the commission to get the complaints from the residents about all this extra traffic when we actually had no input or way of preventing it. So I understand staff, I understand you're trying your best. I'm just putting it out there that it's time, that we are in 2021, right? We're not in 1985. And now we have all these opportunities between bikes and e-bikes and all the other ones. So we should look at some ways that we actually have input and the department has input. Yes, Mr. Frank, I'll give you the floor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And your comment is perfect, actually, because we are talking about transportation demand management. So the demand end of it is a really good conversation, and I welcome you.
You guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay,
Something
I can
happened
hear
to
you.
my thing. I can't.
Okay.
Maybe
So I was thanking you for the comment. It's a very good comment. So given that we're talking about transportation demand management, I have to say that it's getting challenging with the state laws coming out and approving higher densities. When you look at transportation demand management and you look at traffic projections, when you approve additional ADU units and junior ADU units per lot, you can just envision that a lot of those ADU units are going to use cars. And so you can, estimate how many additional trips per lot you're going to have by adding a junior and a separate ADU unit. And there's going to be more cars per lot. I'll leave it at that. So I think the challenge, and my challenge as the transportation director, is to inform the policymakers, yourself and council, of the coming issues and how we are addressing it, and what we can do and what we're challenged with, and then also to inform the public what's coming. So the roads are congested, as I stated in this presentation. TDM will not eliminate the congestion, but it will help us focus on how to improve the efficiency of our road network. So that's where we're going from, not trying to just widen roadways and increase capacity for more vehicles. It's how can we more efficiently move people. So we, of course, it's pretty easy to see and support. We want to increase people walking. We want to increase people biking because that's more efficient. But it gets more challenging on how do you get people to make behavioral changes to leave their new electric, nice Tesla with a beautiful stereo system and pretty much gives you a back rub on your way to work, and get into a bus that maybe you don't feel as comfortable. So those are the conversations that we have to have, and they're very challenging. My thought on it is people like to get from point A to point B in pretty much the quickest manner possible, but you also have to take into that equation and conversation their experience. So I was thinking about this the other day, and Nathan and John, Kim, and myself, we have tons of philosophical discussions on this stuff. But I would gladly spend an extra 10 minutes in my electric car versus having to do like 5 transfers and be seated or, not feel as comfortable as sitting in my car, even if it took me an extra 10 minutes, because it's the overall personal experience that we're making. So it becomes very, very challenging, again, to make that transformation and get people out of their cars, unless if you can make it not only a quicker alternative, but a more enjoyable alternative to get out of your car. So for me, it's pretty simple. If I can bike ride somewhere and get out into the open, I like the outdoors. I'm gladly going to do that, but I'm going to be less inclined to make 3 different mode travel choices to get to my destination, because all of those transfers are going to take time, and it makes it less convenient. So I love the question you brought up. I love the conversation. It's just a very challenging issue.
So you found the secret. We gotta have buses with back rubs seats. Because that's it.
Wait, Tesla buses.
Buses.
That's a Tesla, it's electric. It's not just Tesla, yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap it up. We have Commissioner Pensier. He needs to get in his comments. Do we have Vice Chair? Okay, Commissioner Pensier, because we've been at it for almost 3 hours, and I know all of you need a break. So let's get your comments, Commissioner Pensier. You're muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to take a break, so I'm okay for a little while. Which might be bad news for the rest of you, but if you really need to go, just I can break this up. All right. First of all, I want to thank the staff for the presentation. It was really good, and it encourages me, and in some ways, because as you know, I'm the bicycle guy. I rode to work for the last 25 years of a 30-year career, And I wish I had done it for the first 5. And I had some challenges along the way. And so I know what you're talking about with respect to, you know, why would you do something like that? And, you know, I view them as challenges to be overcome, but most people just go, well, I'll just go with the Tesla. But in any case, I think one of the things we can focus on here with the TDM program is more of a carrot and less of a stick. Because we're never going to convince people to get out of their cars unless they benefit from it personally in some way. You know, some people will respond to money. You know, they get cash back. This dividend parking, I'm very familiar with that program because I've heard the presentations that Mike Bullock has given. And when I was with the city of Oceanside, the Ped Bike Committee, and it took me a long time to understand what he was talking about. But, you know, basically that system is to charge everybody for parking, but then give them back virtually all of it except for what the implementer charges. He gets a small fee, but everybody gets their money back, whether if they use the space, you know, they get it back. But if they don't use the space, then they pay for it. But the people that ride their bikes, they get to keep the money. So it's one of those things that provides a carrot for people to take another mode of transportation to work. So I just suggested that the staff look very, very closely at all the information that he provided there. Next, I want to provide just a few examples of things that we could do with the TDM program to make it better. And I just going to take a few examples here. When I looked at the section 252 part 1, end of trip, there's on page 18, they talk about showers. And of course, if you're going to ride a bike to work, you're probably going to want to take a shower unless you use an e-bike. That's a whole different story, but e-bikes can be transformational in regards to commuting. But for those people that ride a regular bike and use that as part of their workout program, instead of driving to the gym and getting on a stationary train where they can ride to work and back, get the same amount of exercise basically free. So with showers, there wasn't a whole lot of detail there, but a lot of things that are important are that they be private and that they include lockers and that they include towel racks. If you just have a shower that's in the maintenance building, then you know it's not really attractive. The other thing is, where is the bike parking? And so I worked for 11 months in the general office in Rosemead, rode up from Huntington Beach. And when I got to work, the bike rack was out in the middle of the parking lot. And then I'm in my bike clothes and I walk next to my peers who are all dressed in suits getting out of their cars. And I have to walk several hundred yards just to get to where the maintenance building was, which is where the Dixie dumpsters were installed. You know, a real attractive place. The showers were not clean. It just wasn't great. And so one of the things that we could do there is be very specific on what we're talking about for the amenities that we provide for cycling to work. Another example would be, you know, there's on one of the pages there, it talks about that you should do something. And I think we can look at those and say, a lot of those should be shalls. You shall do this. If you want the points, then you have to do this. There are other places where words are used for example, where is the bike parking? And it says that if practicable, then include it on your drawings that you're submitting. Well, that's hugely important. And if you just say if practicable, then they go, well, it's not practical. We're not going to do it. You gotta make it tougher. And finally, I saw other words in there that disturbed me. One of them is the use of the term good faith effort. And I think we have to be a lot more specific on what a good faith effort is before you can collect those points. There's another place where they talk about innovation, and there's an example there. But one of the things that I noticed with my career was that as you progress up in the ladder, you finally get to a position where you get certain benefits. And one of the benefits that you get as you go up is the company will buy you a car, and they give it to you to drive back and forth to work. And then you give it a really good parking place, usually underground, and so that you don't have to walk in the rain from the parking lot like all the other folks. And when companies continue to do that, it's very difficult for people to say, well, I can hardly wait to get there. I'm just going to work hard, and then they're going to give me a free car, and then I don't have to. Yeah, I mean, it's just everything that we do in our society revolves around the automobile. And to have a paradigm shift, we're going to have to provide a lot of carrots and provide very specific things in the TDM program to encourage people to take another look at what else you can do. Finally, I want to say that I don't see anything in the TDM program that really pushes education. And as a bicycle instructor, I can provide education to help people use the existing infrastructure and get to work safely or get to anywhere they want to go safely. But this program is not promoted very well, and very few people even know it exists. And yet, when I do get people in there, for example, I've had some parents bring their kids that are 12, 13, 14 years old, long ways from driver's license. They brought them because they have e-bikes and they want to ride to the beach with their surfboards. And every time that parent allows that kid to ride his bike down to the beach and back, it saves 4 automobile trips. And one of the parents told me after the last class, this has been so helpful because now the freedom it gives me, the peace of mind it gives me to let him do that just saves me all kinds of time driving him back and forth to places he wants to go. Because now I know that if he follows these rules, if he follows the rules of the road, and if he rides the way you've told him to, that he will be fine. And I'm very happy that I took this class. Somehow we got to get that information out there to a lot more people if this TDM program is going to work. So I made a bunch of, I've gone through the whole 108 pages. I didn't send it to you guys, but what I have is a whole bunch of sticky notes in there. And so if you're interested in seeing that, I can put those together. I can send the whole thing and just read through the sticky notes, or I can summarize them and send them later if that's something that staff would like to see.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd like to see your comments in whatever form's easiest for you. So if you send me something with sticky notes, I'll just ask if we can scan it, because it's a little cleaner. But whatever's easiest for you, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pencia, for your comments. Vice Chair Perez.
Madam Chair, I think everyone the commissioners have made some absolutely great points. So I think for me, I'm just going to make it like sweet and succinct and quick on this one. There was a comment about the update to the TDM handbook and also demand management. And Mr. Frank, you made a great point about the part of seeing people on e-bikes, right? And e-bikes are just really moving forward, 136%, I think you said, up and up from previous. And so this is kind of, the new innovation. This is the way that we're going to be moving into the bicycle industry, in how we're going to ride our bikes and get to places. Commissioner Pensier, you and I are bicycle enthusiasts. I still try and use mechanical, but this is such an experience to ride on this. And for me, I did the just the try of taking an e-bike and going 20 miles to work, right? And absolutely amazing, loved it. Just like the picture that you showed of that whole couple riding their bikes. I think the one thing that we have to understand too is, we have to update this in regards to what is moving forward, especially with e-bikes, and looking at the in the handbook at 2.52. I'm kind of curious to see if we need to just innovate something in here in regards to like parking, public bike racks, repair stations, micromobility, charging. That's going to be such a huge thing now, where if we do have places to park our bikes, these are mechanical ones that, you can just park it in there and things like that. But if we're seeing more and more e-bikes, just like we have these e-cars that we have charging stations, we have to take into consideration that. And how do we do that? Because like you said, Mr. Frank, I want to be less inclined on going from station to station. But if I ride my bike at whatever class 3 at 28 miles per hour, going 20 miles out there, I'm going to be pretty close to low. And it's really tough nowadays where to bring your e-bike into a work environment, it's big, you can't put it right next to your desk and plug it in. So my question is, should we try and be innovative in the city where we provide some kind of charging for the city? I'm sorry, for the people that want to commute. I mean, it seems to me that would be something that would really drive that that carrot to get people to come and commute over here. Because again, getting to work with a fully charged battery, but then having to ride back pedaling like through hummus, and that's a quote from some of my cyclist friends. But those are things that to take into consideration. So that's one part. If we can try and come up with something that would be innovative, that would be awesome. And then the second part for me is, as Commissioner Pensier made a comment about education, I think also safety has to be a really crucial point in here. Being protected, with helmets, and also being seen, having visibility on yourself so that cars do not, can't see you and you're just a target. Looking at the book on the voluntary, I think it was the free bike safety incentives. I forgot what page it was, but the cost is medium, but the effectiveness is low. I think for me, I would want to try and make that high so that everyone is covered. I would love to have a program where, if it's within the company, if it's residential, if there's a program that can provide helmet safety and also being visibility safety. I think to me, that's something that's really, really important, just like as Commissioner Pensier said about education. So, I think it's great that we have this base on this TDM handbook, but again, I think we do have some things that we can try and update, but also be innovative into what's coming out there in this new demand for transportation and for riding a bike and getting to and from places. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Vice Chair. It's I think Mr. Frank, this sounds familiar because we had a meeting and I brought up if the city can have e-chargers or e-bike chargers in the village. That's something that I think, now thinking about it, even schools should have it. So I know it's something new and it's going to take time, but these are some good points that if we make it comfortable, they will use it. And we need to keep up with this momentum. Provide safe travel and make it comfortable for them to park it and charge it.
Yeah, and the only thing, last thing I would have to say is I've been in the bike industry for about close to 15 years. There's so many plugs for different types of brands of bikes. So, you know, how do we fit a square peg into a round hole? That's going to be the thing. But I know we can do it. So, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Frank, do you want to say anything else before we take a break?
Just Commissioner Pensier's comments. We're always looking for innovative ways to meet our TDM goals. So we applaud those comments, and we'll consider how we can implement to make it more rewarding to make that transition. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yes, the Tesla buses, to keep that in consideration. Talk to NCTD with the massage. Okay, so I think we gave plenty of comments on this item. Is everyone agreeing to get a 5-minute break? We'll come back at 7:05 for the last most exciting item on the agenda. Yes? Thumbs up? Okay. I'll see you at 7:05.